No one could get near the bull. It had attacked farmers, shattered fences, and terrified the entire village, until an 8-year-old orphan walked up to it and whispered something no one else could hear. What happened next stunned even the experts and changed the future of an old farm forever. Was it magic, memory, or something deeper than words? If you're new to the channel, please subscribe, like the video, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Now, let's jump into the story. The wind rolled across the West Hills, brushing the grass flat and tossing dry leaves like paper into the air. The farmhouse sat alone at the edge of the valley, its red roof dull with age, its windows cloudy from years of dust and weather. Inside the old barn, something stirred that kept most people far away. Bramble, a massive charcoal black bull with eyes like fire and a temper no one could trust. Once prized at shows, he now paced inside his reinforced paddock, snorting and striking the ground with his heavy hooves. Bramble had become a problem, a very big one. Cedric Hale, owner of the property, leaned on the fence with tired arms and a jaw locked tight. He'd aged fast in the last few years. Since his wife died, the farm had lost its shine, and so had he. Now, with Bramble too dangerous to sell or show, Cedric faced another failure he couldn't afford. He nearly crushed the feeder gate again, Cedric muttered, eyeing the bent steel. Second time this month. Beside him, Tilly Groves, his longtime housekeeper, wiped her hands on her apron and squinted at the bull. "That animal's no good anymore, Cedric," she said firmly. "If he's not going to breed or work, you'll have to think about putting him down." Cedric shook his head. "He's not broken. He's angry. Maybe he remembers something. Maybe he's grieving." Tilly raised an eyebrow. "Grieving?" Cedric sighed. "He used to be calmer when my wife was alive. She'd feed him apples right from her palm. Maybe he misses her too." Tilly said nothing. She just looked at Cedric with quiet sympathy, then turned to go back inside. That morning, as the sky thickened with gray clouds and the hills lay still, a car pulled up the gravel road. The tires crunched slowly, uncertainly. A woman in a worn blazer stepped out, smoothing her skirt and walking toward the front door. She was a social worker, and in the back seat of her car a small figure waited. Ruben, 8 years old, thin as a branch, and holding a bag that barely looked full. His shoes were scuffed. His eyes were too old for his face. He had no words ready, and no tears left. The social worker introduced herself to Cedric and explained the situation quickly. Ruben's parents had died in a fire. He had no one else. His name had come up in connection to Cedric's late wife, who had distant family ties through a cousin in town. "It's only temporary," the woman said, "just until a better placement opens." Cedric rubbed the back of his neck. "I'm not great with children. This is a working farm." The woman gave a polite smile, the kind that says, "That's not my problem. I just need your signature." Tilly stepped out of the doorway, drying her hands. "Well, he'll need a warm meal and a proper bed," she said, looking Ruben up and down. "This house has seen worse, and that boy needs somewhere quiet." Cedric gave in with a grunt. "Spare rooms upstairs, second door on the right." Ruben didn't say anything. He just clutched his bag and looked past Cedric out toward the barn. That night the house was silent. Ruben ate slowly, only nodding when spoken to. He didn't touch the dessert. After dinner, he sat on the edge of the bed in the guest room, staring at the old wallpaper and the way the moonlight made strange shapes on the floorboards. The next morning, Cedric left early to run errands in the nearby village. Tilly was busy in the kitchen, humming as she kneaded dough for bread. She didn't notice Ruben slip on his shoes and step outside. He walked past the chicken coop, past the empty swing hanging from the big oak tree. The sky was still pale, not quite blue, and the world seemed to hold its breath. He stopped in front of the paddock. Bramble stood in the far corner, still and alert, his dark eyes locked on Ruben. He snorted once, loud and sharp. Most would have turned and run, but Ruben didn't move. He stepped closer to the fence, one slow foot at a time, until he was only inches away from the thick wooden rails. "Hi," he whispered. Bramble tilted his head. "You're not scary," Reuben said. "Just mad." The bull took a step forward, then another. Tilly, glancing out the window, dropped her towel. Her heart jumped to her throat. She dashed outside, breath catching as she saw Reuben, standing calmly at the fence. And Bramble, usually furious at any visitor, was not charging. He was listening. Tilly didn't dare call out. She watched as the boy reached his small hand through the rail. Bramble sniffed, snorted again, then lowered his heavy head. Their foreheads almost touched. For a long, still moment, the wild bull stood quietly in front of the quiet boy. No fear, no anger, only recognition. Tilly blinked, unsure if she should cry or call Cedric or both. The boy was still whispering. And for the first time in many months, Bramble seemed to be at peace. Tilly Grove stood frozen near the fence, her heart beating like a drum inside her chest. She'd seen angry animals before, frightened ones too, but never anything like this. The bull that had sent full-grown men scrambling was now standing still, eyes half-lidded, as an 8-year-old boy gently stroked the fur between his horns. She didn't dare call out. Reuben was whispering something she couldn't hear, his voice too soft, too personal. The bull's tail flicked slowly, not in warning, but like it did on a warm day in tall grass. Eventually, Bramble stepped back, gave a long, low breath, and walked to the corner of his enclosure. Reuben watched him for a moment, then turned and walked back toward the house like it was the most normal thing in the world. Tilly was waiting on the porch, arms crossed but eyes wide. "Boy," she said slowly. "What were you doing out there?" Reuben stopped. "He's lonely." Tilly blinked. "He's dangerous." Reuben looked down. "Not to me." She didn't argue. She couldn't. Instead, she walked him back into the kitchen and made him tea, the way she always did when something didn't make sense. She added extra honey and sat across from him at the small wooden table. "You've been around animals before?" Reuben shook his head. "Then how'd you know to do that?" He shrugged. "I just knew." Later that morning, Cedric returned from the village with a bag of feed, 2 sacks of flour, and a newspaper folded under his arm. When Tilly told him what had happened, he nearly dropped the bag of flour. "He touched Bramble?" Cedric asked. Tilly nodded. "The bull let him." Cedric opened his mouth, then closed it. He set the bag on the floor, pulled out a chair, and sat down hard. "I don't believe it." "You don't have to," Tilly said. "Just watch." And so he did. The next morning, Reuben returned to the fence after breakfast. No one followed him. Bramble came over like he'd been waiting. Reuben didn't say much, just stood there, hand resting on the wooden rail, talking in low tones. By the third morning, Cedric was standing behind the shed, watching. The bull leaned his head over the fence, eyes soft, and let Reuben scratch the spot behind his ear. Cedric had seen that look in animals before. Trust. Real trust. Word spread quickly. By the end of the week, Jonas Kendrick, the local veterinarian, drove out in his muddy truck to see it for himself. He'd been trying to sedate Bramble for months just to check his hooves. The bull never let him get close. Now, he watched the massive animal stand calmly while a boy half his size sat nearby on an upturned bucket, reading from a worn book. "I don't understand it," Jonas said, scratching his chin. "He should be aggressive, territorial, but he's acting like a cow in spring." "He listens to Reuben," Cedric said, "as if the boy speaks his language." Jonas crouched down and watched Reuben. "That's not training. That's something else. Something I can't explain." That night, Cedric sat on the porch as the sun dipped behind the hills. Reuben came out quietly and sat on the top step. After a long silence, Cedric said, "You know, I bought Bramble at a show 5 years ago. Paid more than I should have. He was calm back then. Proud, strong, but never wild." Reuben didn't answer. He stared at the barn where Bramble's outline was just visible through the half-closed doors. "After my wife passed," Cedric continued, "something changed in him. He wouldn't let anyone near, like he lost something too." Reuben's voice was barely above a whisper. "Sometimes when you lose someone, you stop talking, even if you want to." Cedric looked at the boy. "Is that why you don't talk much?" Reuben nodded. Cedric gave a slow nod of his own. Well, seems Bramble's not the only one who's starting to speak again. The next day, Fleur Madden, an animal behaviorist from a nearby rescue, came by after hearing about the boy and the bull. She arrived with a notepad, a camera, and a healthy dose of doubt. But after 10 minutes watching Reuben work with Bramble, guiding him to walk the perimeter, responding to soft clicks and hand motions, she put her pen down. "This isn't training," Fleur said. "He's not controlling the bull. He's connecting with him." Cedric glanced at her. "You think it's safe?" Fleur nodded. "With Reuben? Yes, but it's more than that. It's healing. They're healing each other." As autumn deepened, the bond between boy and bull became the heartbeat of the farm. Reuben began helping with the sheep too. They followed him like ducklings. The barn cats, usually aloof, curled up in his lap. Even the stubborn hens let him collect eggs without flapping their wings. Tilly started packing him apple slices to take to the barn. Cedric began looking forward to the boy's quiet presence at dinner. The farm was changing, and so was Reuben. He laughed once when a goat sneezed on his hand. Cedric nearly dropped his fork, but not everyone was thrilled. Whispers began in town. Old men at the feed store raised eyebrows. "It's not natural," one muttered. "Bulls don't follow children like puppies." Cedric ignored them, because he knew what they didn't. He knew that sometimes the loudest healing came from the quietest voices. The days were getting shorter. Shadows stretched longer across the fields, and the morning mist now lingered over the pasture like breath held too long. At Hale Farm, the rhythm had changed. Reuben, once quiet as a ghost, now had a place in the routine. He helped Tilly with feeding the hens. He walked the fence line with Cedric. Most days he spent time with Bramble, who now waited by the gate as if expecting him. Even the animals were behaving differently. The skittish sheep had become calmer. The older dog, Rusty, who hadn't barked since his previous owner passed away, wagged his tail when Reuben was near. But while life on the farm seemed more peaceful, not everyone outside the fence was as accepting. One morning, a dark blue car pulled into the yard. A man in a gray coat and wire-framed glasses stepped out. He looked like he didn't smile often. "Marshall Greaves," he said, flashing a badge. "From the local child welfare office." Tilly stepped out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on a cloth. "Is something wrong?" "We've received concerns," he said, looking around the property, "about a child being placed in a potentially unsafe environment. Large animals, no formal schooling records, public attention. All of it raises red flags." Cedric came from the barn, his shirt dusty, hands still holding hay. "Reuben's safe here," he said. "He's not being pushed to do anything. This farm's more stable than most schools these days." Marshall looked unconvinced. "I'll need to speak with the boy, and I'll be filing a recommendation for a formal review." As the car drove away, Tilly looked at Cedric. "They think you're using him." "He's 8, Cedric muttered. "And he's helped more on this farm than any grown man I've hired." That evening, Reuben overheard the adults talking in low voices. He didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. He just looked out the window toward Bramble's barn, and his hand rested gently on the windowsill like he was reaching out to someone far away. The next afternoon, Tilly was sorting through old photo albums in the sitting room. She was trying to clear out space on a bookshelf, something she hadn't touched since Cedric's wife passed away. Most of the albums were dusty and full of birthdays, sheepdog trials, and village fairs. But then she stopped. One photo, in a plastic sleeve, had slipped from the back of an album. It showed a summer scene at Hale Farm. Children were gathered near the barn. A fair, perhaps. There were balloons tied to the fence. And in the center, a young woman knelt beside a small child in overalls holding out an apple to a calf, a black calf, Bramble, and the boy. Tilly's heart stopped. She turned the photo around, found a small scribble on the back. Charity Day, Hale Farm. Greta with Reuben, age 2. Tilly ran outside, her voice shaky. "Cedric, you need to see this." Cedric wiped his hands on his trousers and took the photo. He stared at it for a long time. "I remember that day," he said quietly. "Greta used to host summer days for families from the city. She brought children from all over. That woman was Ruben's mom?" "She must have been," Tilly said. "They visited. Ruben was here before." Cedric nodded slowly. "And Bramble was just a calf." They both looked out toward the barn. "No wonder he's calm around the boy," Tilly whispered. They knew each other. Before any of this. When Ruben was shown the photo later that night, he stared at it with wide eyes. His fingers traced the corner. "I remember the apple," he said softly. And the smell of hay. I think I fell asleep in the grass." "You did," Cedric said, smiling faintly. "Greta told me about a little boy who curled up with a calf and stayed there for an hour. I never connected it." Ruben looked up. "That was Bramble." Cedric nodded. "Seems like you were always meant to come back." The next day, Cedric invited Madeline Croft, the local historian and council member, to visit. He showed her the photo, explained the connection, and let her see Ruben with Bramble firsthand. Madeline watched silently as Ruben guided Bramble with just a voice and gentle movements. "You don't see this every day," she said, amazed. "It's not about control, it's about trust." "We need help," Cedric said. "They're talking about moving Ruben again." Madeline studied the photo again. "I think this changes things." And it did. When Marshall returned for a second visit, he was greeted by a table full of letters, testimonials from farmers, teachers, and neighbors, photos of Ruben working with animals, and a signed statement from Madeline herself, confirming the boy's connection to the farm and to Bramble dating back years. "We're not just making room for a boy," Cedric said firmly. "We're welcoming back someone who already belonged." Ruben stood nearby, quiet, but calm. He knew things were changing again. But this time, he wasn't afraid. Because somewhere deep beneath the surface of the soil and the memory of hoofprints, something real had always been growing. And now, it had finally been found. The village hall smelled faintly of old wood and fresh tea. Folding chairs lined the narrow room, filled with familiar faces from the countryside, farmers, teachers, shopkeepers, and neighbors. They hadn't gathered for a wedding or a town dance this time. They'd come to see what would happen to a quiet boy and a bull that once frightened them all. At the front of the room stood a long table with council officials seated behind it. Papers, pens, and serious expressions were in place. In the middle sat Marshall Greaves, hands clasped tightly, eyes sharp and unreadable. Cedric stood to one side, arms folded, trying to look calm. Beside him sat Ruben, dressed in his cleanest clothes and holding a folded photo in his pocket. He looked small, but his eyes were steady. Tilly gave him an encouraging nod from the front row. "Let's begin," Marshall said, tapping the table. "We are here today to discuss the long-term care and placement of Ruben Hale, currently living at Hale Farm under temporary guardianship." He looked directly at Cedric. "Mr. Hale, it has been suggested that your farm, while peaceful, may not provide the structure or supervision needed for a child with a traumatic past. There are concerns about publicity, safety, and emotional stability." Before Cedric could reply, Ruben stood up. He didn't wait to be called. He didn't ask permission. "My name is Ruben," he said clearly, his voice soft but firm. "And I want to stay." Whispers rippled through the crowd. Marshall raised an eyebrow. "Would you like to explain why?" Ruben nodded. He turned, to face the people, not the table. "When my parents died, I didn't know where I belonged anymore. I was scared. I didn't talk to anyone. Then I came here, to the farm, and I met Bramble." Some of the older folks leaned in now, curious. "I remember being here when I was little," Ruben continued. "I gave Bramble apples when he was just a baby calf. He remembered me. I didn't remember everything at first, but when I saw him, again it all came back." He pulled the photo from his pocket and held it up. "This is me and him. From before." A pause. No one interrupted. Bramble was angry and scared too, just like I was. But when I talked to him, he listened. Not like people listen with words, he just understood. Marshall looked unsure. You're saying the bull calmed down because he remembered you as a toddler? I think he just needed someone who didn't expect him to be angry. Reuben said. That's all I needed too. There was something in the way the boy stood there, gentle but grounded, that softened even the most doubtful faces. A teacher from Reuben's school stood up. Reuben's one of our brightest students. He doesn't cause trouble. He helps the younger kids. He talks more now. Smiles more. Whatever this farm is doing, it's working. Next, Dr. Lena Roberts, a local vet who had observed Reuben with animals, stepped forward. I've worked with livestock for 15 years. I've seen trauma in animals, real fear, real damage. Reuben's presence calms them. It's not something we can explain easily, but it's something we can't deny. Marshall leaned back slightly, thinking. And you believe this is the best place for him? Cedric finally spoke, stepping up beside Reuben. This boy has brought life back to the farm, he said. Not just to Bramble, but to everything here, and me too. I thought I was done with family after my wife passed. I thought I was too old and too tired to start over. He placed a hand gently on Reuben's shoulder. But he belongs here. And I'd like to make it official. I've started the process to adopt Reuben, if he agrees. The room held its breath. Reuben turned toward Cedric and nodded, the smallest smile tugging at his mouth. Marshall made a few notes, then looked around the room. I see no reason to prevent the adoption process. Provided regular check-ins continue, Reuben may remain at Hale Farm. A quiet cheer rose from the crowd. Tilly wiped her eyes. Bramble, though not in the room, seemed to know. He let out a low, satisfied bellow from his enclosure down the road, as if to mark the moment. Weeks passed. The papers were signed. The photo of Reuben and the calf was framed and placed on the mantel above the fireplace. Life found a new rhythm. Reuben went to school during the week and spent his afternoons helping care for animals. Farmers brought sheep with odd behavior, horses that wouldn't be ridden and dogs that had stopped barking. Reuben didn't fix them like magic, he just listened. And that made all the difference. One frosty morning, Cedric found Reuben sketching in a notebook near the barn. Bramble stood behind him, chewing hay, perfectly at ease. What are you working on, lad? Cedric asked. Reuben held up the notebook. On the page was a drawing of the farm, the animals, and two stick figures, one tall, one small, under the branches of the big oak. It's for my book, Reuben said. I want to tell our story one day. Cedric smiled. Then you better keep writing, and so he did. Not just the story of a bull and a boy, but of a home rebuilt not by fences, but by roots that grew from kindness, understanding, and the quiet courage to stay.